She tried to follow a male member of staff home.
Well, this video got delayed. I actually started this in November last year, 2024, but life happens. This is a follow-up to my last video dating back to October 2024, so I apologize for the delay. I will try to pick up where I left off last year as best I can. I think I may need to refresh my memory regarding the whole Fiona Harvey saga. On my previous video, I went over her history with Richard Gadd and read over some of the emails she sent to him that totally contradicted the testimony she gave during said interview. On this video, I want to cover her history with Laura Wray and point out some more lies and contradictions when compared to Laura Wray's interview she did with Piers Morgan. As I was going over the emails Fiona sent to Richard and comparing them to her Facebook posts, I discovered a very interesting contradiction, a potential admission of guilt on a matter that she previously denied. More on that coming up. In case you missed it, I made a 4-hour video going over all of her crazy, psychotic, unhinged Facebook posts. Yes, you heard that right. A 4-hour video strictly reading her Facebook posts. The reason I made that video was because I wanted to highlight her patterns and display that she definitely does have tendencies to potentially send 41,000 emails over a 5-year period, just as Richard Gadd claimed. If you haven't seen that video, I'll leave a link on the outro if you want to check it out. Alright, so let's get to the interviews Piers Morgan did with Fiona Harvey and Laura Wray so we can compare their testimonies and see who we believe comes across more credible.
Let me ask you, The Sun reported an interview with Laura Wray.
See, that's how you know right there that someone's not even listening to you. Just very condescending. And you can tell from her body language she doesn't care about anything he's saying, and all she's doing is waiting to talk. People like that are a nightmare to deal with. So annoying.
You've referenced to accused you of inappropriate behaviour whilst you worked with her. Now, the background to this is that you came into contact with the late Glasgow MP Jimmy Wray, who died aged 78 in 2013, and his solicitor wife Laura, who was 62, when she was a former Labour Party member. Mrs. Wray said that she gave Aberdeen University law graduate you did graduate from Aberdeen?
Yes, yes.
With a law degree. A trainee role at a legal firm, MacPhail Lawrence Partnership, in 1997. Is that true?
It was called L&L Lawrence. I think she forgets the name of her own firm. It was called L&L Lawrence.
You claimed in our interview that you didn't even know the name of your own firm.
Okay, so as we just heard how condescendingly Fiona stated that Laura Wray is so incompetent that she doesn't even know the name of her own law firm, let's see if Laura Wray can offer some type of explanation to refute Fiona's disparaging remark.
Well, that's nonsense. I mean, my firm was called L&L Lawrence at the time I employed her. We subsequently amalgamated with a much larger firm called Drummond Miller, who took over ourselves and another trade union firm called MacPhail's. So to keep the connection with the firms and to keep the goodwill, they called us the MacPhail Lawrence Partnership in Glasgow, and then a few years later, we were all subsumed into Drummond Miller.
Okay, so Laura Wray seems to offer a perfectly valid response to Fiona's wisecrack. So just here alone, we already see a stark difference in demeanor and professionalism between these two individuals. Laura Wray is just speaking very matter-of-factly, while Fiona is just hurling childish insults.
But that's all true. She gave you a trainee job.
She lured me away from another firm. She headhunted me from another firm because she needed someone to do employment law. And I'm pretty good at employment law, so.
Okay, so Fiona claims Laura Wray recruited her to work at her law firm as an attorney to do employment law. So this would indicate that Fiona was, in fact, an actual attorney. But so far, there has not been a shred of evidence to confirm that Fiona is a professional lawyer as she portrays. So let's see what Laura Wray says.
Did you believe that she was qualified?
Oh no, I knew she wasn't qualified. She was looking for a traineeship. Trainees do menial jobs like, at the start filing or, sitting in and things. You're training them. They're not doing anything of any great worth for you.
Okay, so this makes more sense. Fiona was not recruited by Laura to do employment law, but Fiona actually reached out to Laura Wray looking for a traineeship. Much more believable.
So you need to have a 2-year training.
But she said she had a law degree.
Yeah, but that's not enough.
No, it's not full legal training. But do you think that she even had the law degree?
I think she had the law degree because in my file of papers, I do have a copy of something from the Law Society where it does state that she's got a law degree. So I believe she has a law degree. And I believe that some years later, she got the diploma in law, which you require to have in Scotland.
Do you think she ever practiced law?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so Laura Wray says she thinks that Fiona did get a law degree, but never actually went on to practice law the way that Fiona claims.
I mean, I don't think she ever got a traineeship in Scotland. She, I know for sure, worked with another firm after myself and was fired from there and caused that firm a lot of grief.
Okay, so after Laura had to fire Fiona from her own firm, which we're about to get into, Laura says Fiona started working at another law firm and was also fired from that firm. Well, at least she's consistent.
She said that she had to sack you days later because you were completely incapable of behaving yourself.
I walked. Her staff were really, really rude to me.
Okay, if you look at the video I made reading her Facebook posts, you'll see she complains about everyone, everywhere she goes. She complained about her barber at the hair salon. She complained about a guy walking his dog in front of her apartment building. She complained about her movers. She complained about not having food because the restaurant she called was rude when she tried to place her order. She even complained about a handicapped man on a motorized cart taking up too much space in the aisle at the grocery store. She complains about everything and everyone, and yes, she also complained about Piers Morgan a couple days after this interview. So yeah, I think I'm going to believe Laura Wray on this matter.
She then said that following you leaving, obviously very quickly, that you then harassed her. You were then known as Fiona Muir, obviously, as you said, Muir Harvey. Mrs. Wray said she was so frightened, she issued workers at her firm with personal alarms. You were then served an interim interdict to stop you from contacting the law.
Again, with the insufferable, condescending moans. She sounds like a cow going into labor. I really hope this trial with Netflix is televised. Miss Harvey, it's come to the court's attention that you have an extensive history of stalking. And that not only did you stalk Richard Gadd and Laura Walker, aka Laura Wray, but also Daily Mail journalist Neil Sears and British politician George Galloway. Is this true, Miss Harvey?
Why would two people who have no contact with each other at all, Laura Wray and Richard Gadd, why would they both portray you as a very unpleasant harasser?
I don't know why Richard Gadd has, but Laura Walker, it was certainly because I was going for parliamentary selection.
Yeah, that sounds accurate. Laura Wray was intimidated by your brilliance and felt threatened that you were going to get the position she wanted. So she started a smear campaign against you in a desperate attempt to sully your good name. Man, these politicians are cutthroat.
Two different, you get my point, two different people.
Yeah, but Richard Gadd has Googled that. Richard Gadd has used that as
well, that's in the drama.
Show.
Is when they find out that you had previously harassed this family.
I haven't harassed that family.
Well, I guess that depends on your definition of harassment. Because as I said at the start of this video, I discovered a bit of a smoking gun between Fiona's Facebook posts and her emails to Richard Gadd that may in fact prove that she did in fact harass Laura Wray and her family. So let's check it out and you draw your own conclusion. Okay, so this was a Facebook post she wrote April 29th, 2024. Like I previously said, I made a 4-hour video going over all of her Facebook posts. If you haven't seen that video, you should definitely check it out to hear the kinds of thoughts constantly running through her mind. So on this post, she says, "The internet keeps crashing. So her firm went bust. She got pregnant with Jimmy Wray, had a disabled child. Someone reported them to social services. Not me. It's not my style. She had been nasty to folk for years. He had been accused of wife beating. They had loads of political enemies." Okay, so as we've already established on this video, simply comparing Fiona's Piers Morgan interview clips to Laura Wray's Piers Morgan interview clips, we've already established who comes across more credible. Not only does Laura Wray come across more credible, but Fiona comes across very childish, petty, dishonest, and just a nightmare to deal with. So here on this post, you can see yet another example of Fiona's vile behavior. First, she says Laura's firm went bust because she got pregnant by Jimmy Wray and then had to point out that their baby was disabled. Then goes on to say they had been really nasty to folk for years and that Jimmy Wray had been accused of beating his previous wife. And they had loads of political enemies, which is why someone reported them to social services for beating their disabled child. And of course, Fiona has to emphasize that it wasn't her. It's not her style, y'all. Fiona doesn't do stuff like that. It was one of Laura and Jimmy Wray's many political enemies. But what she mentioned in passing on an email she wrote to Richard Gadd in 2015 hints that she actually did report Jimmy and Laura Wray to the police. Now, legal disclaimer, I am not claiming that this is factual. I am not saying this proves Fiona is 100% guilty. I am merely pointing out that going off this email, an email that has been submitted to the police by Richard Gadd and could be used by Netflix as evidence in the Fiona Harvey Netflix trial, that going by this email, it does appear she is admitting she did report Jimmy Wray and Laura Wray to the police. Even though this may not be 100% solid proof, it definitely raises enough suspicion to warrant a legal investigation. Now, Fiona explains to Richard why she did it and tries to justify her reason. And what she explains is in a different context from what Laura Wray has said. But one thing to keep in mind is that Fiona lies a lot, as I've already established in previous videos. So it would make sense for her to fabricate why she did it to not come across as a monster in Richard's eyes. So let's check out the email and then hear Laura Wray's side of things. Alright, so here's the email you can see was sent on February 2nd, 2015, just 10 years ago. Very pushed for time for today, so there will be typos. Yeah, we already know that, Fiona. And right under that is the line in question. I'd also like to point out it was me who called police to Wray and Walker. I'd also like to point out it was me who called police to Wray and Walker. FYI, Walker being Laura Wray's maiden name. So, as you can see, this appears to contradict the Facebook post where she says it's not her style to report people to the authorities. She appears here to admit she called the police on Jimmy and Laura Wray. But then she tries to justify why she did it. I could not get my law books worth thousands out of her office, and her staff would not release my degree and post-grad certificates and all my law society documentation. I had no choice. No cop was ever called to me. I've got maybe 30,000 pounds worth of owl books in my conjurant office. These things cost a fortune. Okay, so she claims she didn't have a choice in the matter, but her explanation seems a bit fishy to me. I'll unpack that in a minute. But before I get to that, let's finish the rest of her email, where she simply transitions into an entirely different topic, as only Fiona can. I hope you are eating properly and looking after yourself. Take a hot bath before bed and lavender under pillow. Do not take psychiatric remedies for sleep like the English do. You have an overactive mind, which is why you don't sleep. Plus, Yopu won't be getting laid properly. Need to go. F. Alright, so I have three main reasons that I'm not buying Fiona's explanation. 1. She only worked in Laura Wray's office for 2 weeks. Did she really load all of her law books up there in that short amount of time? Don't we think Laura probably would already have the necessary law books in the office? And when Laura tells her side of the story, which we'll get to soon, she never mentions anything about Fiona trying to get her books back, which makes me believe, don't know for sure, but makes me believe Fiona's lying. 2, if Fiona really did take her books there, why would Laura refuse to give them back to her? Are those books so valuable that Laura needs them? Can Laura not afford her own set of law books? Does she need to steal the trainees' law books? I guess the set of law books that Fiona had were better than the set of law books Laura had. So Laura just flat out refused to give them back. And 3, if it was true that Fiona had her books there but Laura didn't return them, it's likely due to legalities. Fiona was probably trespassed, and there may have been some kind of ongoing investigation, and Laura couldn't get them back until it concluded. But I'm sure Laura would have eventually returned them. Assuming what Fiona said was even true in the first place, in which I seriously doubt. Because if you think about it, it just doesn't make sense. Okay, so on this email Fiona wrote to Richard, she is admitting she called the police on Jimmy and Laura Wray. So by her own admission, she did do that. So now it's not a matter if she reported Jimmy and Laura Wray, but why she reported them. So as we've already established that Laura Wray comes across much more credible than Fiona, let's hear Laura's side of the story, and then I'll try to break it down as best I can.
She was rude to staff, she shouted at people, she was inappropriate with a male member of staff, she tried to follow a male member of staff home. I mean, all sorts of things happened. She threw a book across the office and hit somebody with it. So, you know, it was nasty stuff. She grabbed a phone from one of my members of staff who was on trying to explain something to a client who obviously was giving him some difficulty, and she then started shouting abuse down the phone at the client. So there was a whole number of these incidents. So I just said, well, I don't think, you know, you're cut out for here.
Wow, what an elitist.
So I said to her, I'm afraid that's it. I paid her for the month. She'd only been there 2 weeks and obviously had done nothing apart from cause complete havoc. And then she said, I'm not leaving.
I guess Fiona's willing to die on this hill in a classic case of when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object.
I'm going to phone the Law Society, I'm not leaving. And she then started shouting and screaming, running around the office. And eventually my cashier and I, Caroline, had to get one arm on either side of her and actually march her out of the office.
Oh, well, I guess she is movable. You just need to get an extra person.
And she stood out there for at least half an hour screaming abuse. And that was when it all started. Thereafter, every day I'd come into the office, The answer phone would be full of messages, all from her, all threatening, nasty.
What kind of threats?
I'll get you, you're not going to get away with this, I'll get Jimmy Ray.
So we now see the motive behind why Fiona may want to report Laura Wray and her husband to the police. But notice Laura has not mentioned anything thus far about Fiona demanding her law books back. Nothing at all about any books. Fiona's messages have all been threats of revenge after being fired. And what better way to get revenge than to call police and falsely accuse you of child abuse? But actually, Fiona does that a few years down the road in retaliation to something else that Laura does. We'll get to that in a moment. Right now, Fiona has a different revenge plot that Laura's about to go into detail about.
And how many was she leaving on a daily basis?
Well, the answer phone would be filled up.
How many was that, roughly?
I'm not sure how many messages, but she would rant on. It would take probably about an hour's worth of call.
Every day?
Every day.
Okay, so Laura says that after Fiona's termination that she would come into the office every morning and her voicemail inbox would be full with about an hour of threatening messages from Fiona, which is very much in line with Richard Gadd's claim that Fiona sent him 41,000 emails and 350 voice messages. But of course, Fiona denies this.
In the course of your relationship with Richard Gadd, you send him 41,000 emails, 350 voice messages, 744 tweets, 48 Facebook messages, and 106 letters.
That's simply not true. If somebody was sending somebody 41,000 emails or something, they'd be doing how many a day? Lots.
Well, they'd be obsessively contacting
yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
What did you send him?
None of that's true. I don't think I sent him anything.
How many do you think you sent him?
A handful.
Like
that.
What does that mean? How many?
Less than 10.
Okay, so 1 minute Fiona claims she didn't think she sent him anything, then says it was only a handful, then says it was less than 10. So does this really seem like a testimony of a credible person? Also, when I was encouraging viewers to go back and look at the 4-hour video I made reading Fiona's Facebook posts, you probably assumed that was covering posts she wrote in the last few years or so. But no, you would be wrong. It actually only covered about 2.5 weeks worth of Facebook posts. Yes, it took me 4 freaking hours to read all of her posts from a 10 to 11 day period. And yet she's going to act like Richard Gadd's crazy for saying she sent him 41,000 emails in a 5-year period? Is she also going to deny leaving all those voicemails to Laura Wray as well?
But it was pretty persistent for a couple of years. Also,
years?
Years. She did this for nearly 5 years. So what she would do, given that way back in 1997, this was really at the start of the internet, so people weren't emailing to the same extent they do now. What she would do would be phone up other solicitors or send them faxes with defamatory stuff about me, saying how terrible I was, how terrible the firm was, accusing people of everything under the sun.
And this is yet another point that strengthens Laura Wray's case and makes her more credible than Fiona. Because everything she just said that Fiona did back in the late 90s is precisely what Fiona did on her Facebook posts in 2024. If you watch the 4-hour video I made reading those, you'll see tons of posts she wrote about Laura Wray, completely defaming and slandering her. Exactly what Laura just said Fiona did to her a couple decades ago. Everything Laura Wray says in this interview checks out, whereas most things Fiona said on her interview does not.
And then, I would get phone calls from people I didn't know who would say, I'm really embarrassed. I've had this fax through from this woman. I don't know her and I don't know you, but I thought I ought to bring it to your attention.
Okay, so after Laura terminated Fiona from her law firm, Fiona would harass Laura by filling her voicemail inbox every morning with threatening messages, and then would call and fax other law firms and smear Laura Wray and her law firm. So Fiona had not yet made the child abuse allegations against Laura and Jimmy Wray at this point. This actually happens a little later, and this is what Laura is about to get into.
She also claimed that you and your husband, Jimmy, who's sadly no longer with us, but he accused you of assaulting your 3-year-old son, Frankie, who was born with a rare chromosomal disorder.
Well, that was that was the point at which I thought I can take no more of this. I had heard from a lawyer some months before that who phoned me, who'd taken her on, and he said to me that he was in a terrible state because he'd fired her, and he went home that night to find 2 social workers at his door. The police were involved. It was all taken very seriously, and the accusation was that he'd been abusing his children. This went to the children's schools and so on. This man was on his knees and really upset. And I said, well, you know, all I could do is perhaps speak to the sort of things she's done to me.
Okay, so just to clarify this timeline, the lawyer that contacted Laura called her to inquire about Fiona. So if I'm understanding this correctly, after Fiona was fired from Laura's firm, this attorney later hired Fiona, and in a shocking twist, he ended up firing her.
I know for sure worked with another firm after myself and was fired from there and caused that firm a lot of grief.
Who could have seen that coming? And so, in retaliation, Fiona called the police and said that the man who fired her was abusing his kids. And so, when he came home from work that night, he had social services waiting for him at the front door. And shortly after that was when he reached out to Laura Wray, I'm guessing to try to get someone to testify how loony Fiona Harvey is to help clear his name with police. And little did Laura know at the time that Fiona would do the exact same thing to her in the future.
So when I was going to go to the bar in 2003, I had to do some exams the year before that. So I went to Strathclyde University, and who's the first person I see when I get to the university to start doing a couple of classes but her. And I couldn't believe it, because at that point it had gone a bit quiet. And there she was, and from then on she followed me around the university. She would stand right up beside me and so on. So I complained to the professor at the university. And again, stalking wasn't really taken that seriously by people. I think people just assumed, oh, it's 2 women who just don't get on or something like that. So he said, oh, well, I've checked her records and she's not registered as a student here, so I've got no locus over her. And I said, well, if she's not registered as a student, can you not just throw her out, get the security? And he said, oh, I don't like to do that. Now, by the end of the university year, I got a letter to say that he apologised because she'd gone on to upset a number of members of staff, harass them and other students. So she knew that I'd made a complaint about them. So one day, just after I made the complaint, I go home to find 2 social workers at my door, saying to me, you know, we have some very serious allegations. So I said to them, well, come in. And I said, before you say anything to me, I said, and I do understand you've got a job to do and it's a very important job. I said, but I want to tell you what I think is going on here. So I explained to them about the other lawyer. I explained to them everything, and they confirmed, oh yes, it's a woman who says that she's at university with you. Now, initially she gave a false name of another student, and it wasn't the other student because I contacted the other student. But to cut a long story short, she made 5 complaints to the social work department, eventually screaming at them down the phone, demanding that my severely disabled son be taken into care. Now, to my mind, that was the point at which I thought, no, enough is enough. I'm not having this. I'm not having this poor child beleaguered in that way. So I contacted the police. The police didn't do anything.
So according to Laura Wray here, the one that we've established is the more credible witness, Fiona started stalking Laura Wray on a university campus a few years after Laura fired her. So then Laura complains to a professor at the university that Fiona is stalking her, and that since Fiona isn't even a registered student at the university, can you please just kick her off the campus for harassing students? But the professor didn't really take her seriously, so didn't do anything about it. But Fiona found out Laura made the complaint, and so she retaliated by calling the police and telling them that Laura and Jimmy Wray were abusing their disabled son. So a couple days later is when Laura Wray came home to find social services at her door, just like what Fiona did to the other attorney who fired her. Okay, so let me go ahead and wrap this up and try to tie this all together. Alright, so now that we've heard Laura Wray's side of things, I wanted to bring it back to the email in question. So I'm going to read it over again real quick. Very pushed for time for today, so there will be typos. And here is the line in question. I'd also like to point out it was me who called police to Wray and Walker. I'd also like to point out it was me who called police to Wray and Walker. I could not get my law books worth thousands out of her office, and her staff would not release my degree and post-grad certificates and all my Law Society documentation. I had no choice. No cop was ever called to me. I've got maybe 30,000 pounds worth of law books in my current office. These things cost a fortune. I went into so much detail in this video so we could examine this email and try to figure out if this could be considered an admission of guilt. I would think that if it could be proven that one went to the police with false allegations against a person, that there would be some kind of legal ramifications from it. Of course, if Fiona was telling Richard Gadd the truth and she only called police on Laura and Jimmy Wray to recover her books, then of course that's perfectly fine. But going by the details of this video, does anyone really believe that is why she called the police on Laura and Jimmy Wray? So Fiona, during your 2 weeks of working at Laura Wray's law firm, you took your expensive set of law books to the office. And when you were fired, you were not allowed to take your books with you. And Laura Wray refused to send your books back to you for some reason. Therefore, your only course of action, the only choice you had, as you said on the email, was to call the police. Okay, but if you called the police to help you get your books back from Laura Wray's office, why did you mention you called the police on Laura Wray and on Jimmy Wray? What does Jimmy Wray have to do with your books that are in Laura's office? Why bring him into a matter between you and Laura? Because from the outside looking in, it appears what you wrote on the email to Richard, that you called police on both Jimmy and Laura Wray, was regarding the false accusation of them both abusing their disabled son. But you didn't want to admit to Richard it was a false report made up out of spite. So you created a story about how Laura wouldn't return your books because you were hoping Richard would see you as the victim and understand why you called the police and then be on your side. Of course, this is just my theory, but based on everything we've learned about Fiona Harvey, it's very plausible. Also, if when you, Fiona, called the police on Laura Wray and Jimmy Wray for some reason, just to try to get your books back, then who was it that actually did call the police and report that Jimmy and Laura Wray were both abusing their disabled son? Who caused social services to show up on Laura and Jimmy Wray's doorstep?
Did you order the code red?
That information should be pretty easy to track down. Who made that call if it wasn't you, Fiona? I want the truth. You can handle the truth. Also, it's funny how during Laura Wray's entire interview here, she never mentions anything about you calling police to get your books back. Not a single word about any books, except for the one you threw across the room and hit someone with.
She threw a book across the office and hit somebody with it.
And in all of those Facebook posts you wrote, I don't recall, and I could be wrong, maybe I just don't remember since there were so many posts, but I don't remember you ever mentioning anything about Laura Wray not returning your law books. I would think that if that were true, you'd be shouting it from the mountaintops, especially over social media. So, very funny that Laura Wray refused to give you your property back and you just stayed quiet about it. Okay. And again, I am not saying any of this is factual. I'm just pointing out evidence that, like I said before, I think is suspicious enough to warrant an investigation and let the authorities figure out what is factual.
Have you ever met Richard Gadd?
No.
Because I put this question to her about how unusual it is to have somebody stalking two completely different people, both of whom, by her estimation, are fantasizing. Let's take a look. Why would two people who have no contact with each other at all, Laura Wray and Richard Gadd, why would they both portray you as a very unpleasant harasser?
I don't know why Richard Gadd has, but Laura Walker, it was certainly because I was going for parliamentary selection.
The two different, you get my point, two different people.
Yeah, but Richard Gadd has Googled that. Richard Gadd has used that as
well, that's in the drama.
Show.
Is when they find out that you had previously harassed this family.
I haven't harassed that family.
Previously harassed this family.
I haven't harassed that family. I didn't harass that family.
When you saw that exchange, what went through your mind?
I was horrified. I mean, I've actually watched your interview a few times because the first time I saw it, I was in such shock watching her, seeing her, it just brought it all back again. And I've watched it several times to see what is it she's saying about me. And it's unbelievable that after the things she did, that she can say she wasn't harassing my family. Of course she was harassing my family.
For many years?
For many years. For longer than Richard Gadd.
Do you have a message for her if she's watching this?
Well, I think my message would be, I think you need to get some help. I think you need to get psychiatric help as soon as possible. And I think you need to get off Facebook.